Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this installment of the KPerpetua Speaker Series. My name is Tara DuBois, and I'm the Communications Coordinator for the KPerpetua Collaborative, and it's a pleasure to coordinate the series with a variety of partners. Today, we will be hearing from Althea Rizzo about the Cascadia earthquake, ready or not. And our next one will be next Saturday, December 11th, with Rachel Wheat, and she will be talking about linking landscapes for wildlife, the Oregon Connectivity Assessment and Mapping Project. I want to acknowledge that the KPerpetua area landscape from Yachats to Florence is the traditional territory of the Siletz tribe and the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw tribe. And we want to acknowledge the tribal governments and their roles historically and today in taking care of these lands. A little bit about the KPerpetua Collaborative. Their vision is to foster conservation and collaboration within local communities for scientific exchange, management and awareness and stewardship in and around the KPerpetua Marine Reserve. And our three guiding principles are community engagement, leveraging resources, and engaging in partnerships. And you can see here at the bottom, the logos. These are our founding partners who came together to organize the collaborative. But we also have a variety of other partners that we work with, both locally, agencies, businesses, and individuals. And just want to acknowledge that we couldn't do this work without all of our partners. And a little bit about the KPerpetua Marine Reserve. That is our focus of the collaborative. And the KPerpetua Marine Reserve is Oregon's largest marine reserve in Oregon. And combined with marine protected areas to the north and south, there's some form of protected water that stretches between Yachats and Florence. And the marine reserves are managed by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we also host a variety of community science adjacent to the KPerpetua Marine Reserve. You can see here a variety of projects that we do, many of them through the summer, but we also have some that are ongoing throughout the year, such as monthly beach cleanups. And you can also join in on iNaturalist.org, the KPerpetua BioBlitz series, and help us document biodiversity in the area. And we are also hosting, in addition to this speaker series, a Young Scientist webinar series that's the second Tuesday of the month, October through April. Our next one is coming up on December 14th. And you can find out more about all of these projects and upcoming events and speakers at our website at KPerpetuaCollaborative.org. And I always like to encourage folks to connect with us on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. And if you feel inclined and you'd like to support everything that the collaborative is doing, you can also donate. There is a donate button right on our website that will take you right to the spot where you need to go to do that. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Althea Rizzo. She joined the Oregon Department of Emergency Management in 2008 as the Geologic Hazards Program Coordinator after completing a one-year National Weather Service funded program as Tsunami Coordinator for the city of Lincoln City. She is a member of the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program and serves as the co-chair of the Warning Subcommittee. She is a member of the Cascadia Region Earthquake Work Group and is the co-chair of the Education and Mitigation Subcommittee. She has successfully implemented outreach programs for seismic hazards such as earthquakes and tsunamis. Dr. Rizzo has been a frequent instructor and lecturer on hazard mitigation, risk reduction, and outreach program design and implementation. And with that, Althea, I'm going to stop share and you can take it over from here. And as Althea brings up her presentation, I just want to let the folks know out there who are chimed in, if you would like to post a question throughout the presentation, please just pop it in the chat or in the Q&A section. It's best to communicate by chat with us. So if you've got any questions or want to tell us anything, that's the best way. And then at the end of Althea's presentation, we'll do a Q&A section. Althea, it's all yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tara, for inviting me to virtually join you all out at KPerpetua to talk about Cascadia, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I wanted to share with you some of the ways that we are getting ready for Cascadia and the ways that you can also get ready for Cascadia and the subduction zone earthquake that will be happening from that. So a little bit about what Cascadia Subduction Zone is. If you remember back to your 8th grade science class, and you remember that the Earth is kind of like this great big egg that has a broken eggshell, and this broken eggshell is constantly moving around, and it's pushing past each other, it's pulling apart and creating new land. And we have an area called subduction zone where one of the tectonic plates is diving underneath another. And that's what we have sitting right off of our coast here in Oregon, is the Juan de Fuca plate is diving underneath the North American plate. And this subduction zone runs about 600 miles from Northern California to British Columbia. And we know that these are capable of producing very, very large earthquakes that impact a wide area. And in fact, our subduction zone is very similar to the subduction zones that caused the 2004 Sumatra and the 2011 Japanese earthquakes and tsunamis. So when we talk about Cascadia, you know, everyone knows that it's perfectly capable of having a 9-point or higher earthquake, but we can't say for certain that that's going to be the next Cascadia earthquake. We really can't predict how big the next one or when the next one is going to be. But what we can do is look into the past for what has happened. And scientists have been doing some really great research over the last few decades to better understand Cascadia. Up until about the mid-1980s, they thought that the Cascadia subduction zone just never had these very large earthquakes. They thought it was, you know, basically a dead zone that didn't have earthquakes. But as they started looking into the geology of the area, they found much more evidence that, in fact, we do have these large earthquakes. And when we think about how big it's going to be, there's some factors that we have to take into consideration, and how much of that fault zone actually ruptures is really key to how big the earthquake and the tsunami is going to be. So on the top of this slide, you'll see this timeline. And we've had about 40 of the Cascadia subduction zone earthquakes in the last 10,000 years. And you can kind of see it's spread out over time. And, you know, humans are pattern-seeking animals, and it's been a while since we've had our last one. So, you know, I have a really contrary brain, and it just wants to put a big red line where it says, you are here. So we can't predict when the next one is going to happen, and we can't predict how big the next one is going to happen. But we absolutely do know that it will happen at some point. On the bottom of this slide kind of shows the sizes possible from a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And about half of those earthquakes over the last 10,000 years have been the full rupture, the 9.0 and higher. But the other half of those earthquakes have been smaller ruptures. But that smallest rupture is about a 7.6. So that is still a very large earthquake and will be a huge impact to the area directly opposite of the subduction zone there on the Oregon coast. So when we have a subduction zone earthquake, what can we expect to see happen? Well, first of all, we have the strong ground shaking. And this is rarely where a lot of our preparedness is aimed at, because how well we build, how strong our infrastructures are, how strong our buildings are, how resilient our roadways are, will really make a difference in how we're able to recover from a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. Now remember, we've only known about this hazard since about the mid-1980s. And so we have a lot of ground to kind of catch up on. But then we've spent the last, you know, since 1980s, goodness, 40 years, getting much more prepared for Cascadia. And we spent a lot of time talking about mitigation and retrofitting buildings, because I want to draw your attention to the bottom of this slide. So this is kind of a tale of two different earthquakes. On the left, we have the 2010 Haiti earthquake, which was about a 7.0 earthquake. Still a very large earthquake. On the right, we had the Japanese event, which was a 9.0 earthquake. Haiti lost 250,000 people in that earthquake. Their infrastructure, their buildings just crumbled. It's a very poor country, one of the poorest in the world. They just had very poor construction standards, very poor building codes. Whereas on the right, Japan is, a wealthy country and has been very purposefully hardening all of its infrastructure so that when they get these large earthquakes, they were able to recover to about an 80 to 9% in utilities, telecommunications, and transportation within about 2 to 3 weeks after that earthquake and tsunami. Outside of the tsunami zone. Inside the tsunami zone, where we had the inundation, there's still a lot of damage. And inside the tsunami zone, it just takes decades to replace everything that's just sort of been scoured away by the tsunami. Another one of the hazards that we're going to deal with are landslides. And this is really important. And as we're seeing right now, supply chain issues are real. And it doesn't take a Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake to cause lack of resources being able to get into your kitchen cabinets. We expect that we're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of landslides during the Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake and their aftershocks. And this is going to impact our transportation system greatly. We rely on having those roads open so that we can get food into grocery stores, so that we can get toilet paper, so that we can get all the things that we need for our lives. And there are, some of these arteries and roadways that are going to be impacted for 3 to 5 years. They're estimating it's going to take that long to get roadways open between 101 and I-5, so that it's just kind of open to regular traffic. It just takes a really long time to recover from these kinds of events if you're not planning ahead and taking those mitigative actions before the Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake happens. Another one of the hazards that we are starting to mitigate against is liquefaction. This happens during the earthquake when you have sandy and consolidated soils that are saturated with water, which is pretty much all of Western Oregon. It can basically turn to pudding during the earthquake, and buildings don't sit very well in pudding. They have a tendency to sink down, but underground utilities can shake up out of the ground. You can have sort of land sloughing off, like up on the right side of this is Turnagain Heights up near Anchorage, Alaska. And this is all caused by liquefaction. The left side of this side, the left side of this is from the 2011 Christchurch earthquake. And there were residential areas after that earthquake that were without sewer and water for over 2 years. So they were using porta potties that were out in the middle of the street for over 2 years, because it just took that long to get the utilities back up and running. And there are some areas of Christchurch, residential areas, that they just simply returned back to green space because it was too expensive to engineer a solution for that liquefaction. And then, of course, we have the tsunami. Depending on where you are on the coast, it could be 15 minutes before those first waves arrive, or it could be 45 minutes, depending on where you are. Southern part of the coast, we're closer to the subduction zone, so that time will be shorter. But if you're in Astoria, it could take 45 minutes to an hour for the tsunami waves to start coming in. Now, when we're looking at tsunami from the Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake, how big that tsunami is going to be really depends on the size of the earthquake. The more that the earth is displaced during the earthquake really makes a difference in the size of the tsunami. So we are expecting between 30 to 50 feet on average up and down the coast, with some areas getting up to about 100. to 150 feet, just depending on the topography and the offshore bathymetry that can sort of funnel energy up into some areas. And then, of course, we have the aftershocks. It takes centuries to build up this stress in the Cascadia Subduction Zone. It's not going to be released in a single instance. It's not going to be released in a single earthquake. So we are expecting hundreds, if not thousands, of aftershocks after Cascadia. And some of these aftershocks could be large enough to, again, create another tsunami. And oftentimes we see some of the more significant damage happening during some of these aftershocks. In fact, that 2011 Christchurch earthquake was an aftershock of a 2010 earthquake that happened down in Canada. So when we are looking at what this means for Oregon, we know that it is really going to impact the state. And, you know, what is Oregon going to look like afterwards? Well, it's not going to be Thunderdome. No matter how much I would totally rock that outfit, you know, we are still going to have laws and systems in place. You just have to understand that all of the people that you are going to be relying on as first responders, for instance, the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, we are also all going to be victims of the earthquake. Now, I live about 5 miles from the office, and I can walk there, but in realistic, I will probably be taking care of my neighbors for those first couple of days, making sure that everybody around me is safe. So it takes time to get people into place to start those actions that will get resources out to the communities. There are national level planning efforts going on so that the federal government knows that when this happens, they start sending resources in, because this is going to affect Northern California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska. So they have these pre-planning sessions, and they know that they're just going to be sending all of this resources our way as your responders here in Oregon sort of filter back into the office as we can. And I want you to think about, you know, where you live in relation to where you work or go to school or what have you. If you cross a bridge, if you know, go through a landslide prone area, after this happens, you could be isolated away from home for some time. So we know that Oregon is at risk from this, but we also know that there's a lot that we can be doing to get ready. We have an example in Japan that people can prepare individually, and we can prepare our state to get ready for these large-scale earthquakes and tsunamis. You think about, you know, all the other things that you prepare for in life. So we know that these kind of things can be tackled and completed. So one of the newest technologies that we have available is what's called Shake Alert. And this is not an earthquake prediction system. This is when, once the earthquake starts, depending how far away you are from where that focal point is or where the epicenter is, or in the case of Cascadia, where that rupture first starts, you could get tens of seconds of warning on your cell phone that an earthquake shaking is going to be coming your direction. And so that gives you a lot of information, and it gives you a warning so that you can then take protective actions, drop, cover, and hold. So how do you get this on your personal device? You can get it through the wireless emergency alert system. You know, that comes over most smartphones automatically. There are purpose-built apps for both the Android and iPhone. And the Android also has Shake Alert built into its software system. So when you get this alert, you have those few seconds so that you can take protective actions. And, you know, this is the standard drop, cover, and hold on. And then if you're in the tsunami area, once the shaking stops, move to high ground and you stay there. What do you do after the shaking stops? Well, if you're in the tsunami zone, move by foot to high ground. If you're not in the tsunami zone, you follow the emergency plan that you and your family have so cleverly devised. So when we're looking at tsunami, it's really, really, really important to understand that we get two types of tsunami here in Oregon. The first one is the local tsunami caused by Cascadia. This is the big bad one. But we also get distant tsunamis here in Oregon. Now, for a local tsunami, the earthquake is your warning. We have no technological fix for getting this information out to you in a timely manner. You just can't get it there faster than the earthquake will get it to you. So if you feel the ground shaking and you're over on the coast and you're in the inundation zone, you know that once the shaking starts, you have to self-evacuate to high ground. But if you are getting a distant tsunami, for instance, like in 2011, caused by the Japanese event, that took 10 hours to get here, and we did not have significant inundation. We had a lot of really strong currents in our bays and harbors, and some of our ports sustained really bad damage. But a distant tsunami, is far different than a local tsunami. So if you hear that you're getting a tsunami from Alaska or from Japan or from the Russian Kuril Islands or anywhere else around the Ring of Fire, you know that's not an instant panic kind of situation. That's kind of a, oh, okay, in a few hours, I know that I have to be off the beach kind of thing. Because we're not dealing with the earthquake, and we have lots of ways to get this information. And think about 2011. How did you hear about that we were getting a Japanese tsunami? It was on the radio, it was on the TV. You can get it through the NOAA weather radios. You see it on Facebook, Twitter, all of social media. Aunt Martha called you from Ohio and said, "I hear you're having a tsunami." So there's lots of different ways to get information about distant tsunamis. So in Oregon, on our tsunami evacuation maps, you will see these kinds of maps at pretty much every single beach access point, and a lot of other areas that allows you to get down into the beach. It's also available online. You can go to oregongeology.org and look this up online. There's an online viewer where you can type in an address. For instance, if you are going to stay in a hotel, you can type in the address of that hotel and find out if they are in fact in the inundation zone. And that's not an automatic starter. There's a couple of hotels on the coast that I stay on, but high ground is literally like a block away. So educating yourself before you go to the beach is really, really important. And I just kind of wanted to reiterate about the distant zone. The earthquake is really far away. You're not going to feel the ground shake. It is going to be hours before the wave arrives, and we're going to have limited amount of inundation. We do have one really worst case scenario, and that's an Alaska and Aleutian Island event that could cause large waves. The 1964 earthquake did cause 30-foot waves here in Oregon, and we did lose a few people in that event. So they're not no hazard, but there's certainly something that you have time to get away from the beach. So when you're going down, it's really important to know that if it's a distant tsunami, you just have to get away from the beaches, the harbors, and the inlets and other low-lying areas. And finding out when it's okay to go back into the tsunami. NOAA's going to send out a cancellation message, and all of the media is going to be picking up on this. But we really encourage people to wait a day or two before they start to get back into the water, because if it's a really large earthquake like the 2011 event, those tsunami waves are still bouncing around the ocean for 72 hours later. And we can still get really strong currents in that time period. So we just recommend that, folks stay away from the water for a few days after a distant event. So when it comes for preparing hazards, now that I've kind of set this like super scary situation up for you, I really want to iterate that it is absolutely possible to prepare for hazards. That you are probably way more prepared than you think you are, and that this is something that you and your family can do. So when we're looking at preparing for hazards, we know we have different hazards depending on where we are. And so you're going to have different preparedness needs. Now, if you are in a wildfire zone, that's going to be very similar to a tsunami zone. You need to have the ability to grab important things within seconds and get out the door and get evacuated. Or there are different times where you may need to shelter in place if there is a winter storm, or if you are inland from an earthquake and dealing with that. We also know that you're going to be at different locations because we cannot predict when earthquakes are happening. You know, you could be at work, you could be at school, you could be at home, you could be shopping, you could be hiking, you know, you just don't know where you're going to be. So looking at your preparedness for hazards, looking at it as sort of a distributed system. You have some at work, you have some at school, you have some at home. You have some supplies for grab and go, you have some supplies for shelter in place. And you kind of look at the whole preparedness effort holistically. The first thing that you need to do is kind of think about, what does your family need? And we really recommend that you take a couple of weeks and write down what your family eats. You know, how much medicines do you consume? How much water do you consume? How much coffee do you consume? That's an important one for me. You know, do you have pets? Do you have livestock? So examine your lifestyle for a couple of weeks just to kind of understand what you need. And then you can take that information and start planning from it. The first thing that we really recommend for everyone to have, and this is what we grew up with, that 72-hour kit, you know, it's some food, it's some water, it's some first aid, medicine, documents, clothes, hygienes. You know, something to keep yourself occupied. It could be a book, it could be a deck of cards. If you're a child, it could be a toy or a game. And everyone should have one of these prepared close to their front door, so that if necessary, they can just literally grab and go. You know, because we don't know when the tsunami is going to happen, and you may not have a lot of time to pack anything to get out to safety. And then start thinking about preparing your household for long-term off-grid living, because that's basically what we're going to be doing. We're going to be camping in our own homes, assuming they're still standing after Cascadia. And the good thing there is that our single-family homes, if retrofitted to be bolted to the foundation, to have a roof connected to the walls, to remove all of those masonry chimneys, or if it was built, you know, in the last 20 years or so, they withstand these kinds of earthquakes pretty well. You're just going to have no power, no water, no internet for quite some time afterwards, but you will have shelter. So, you know, looking at this, we want to make sure that people are staying in their own homes, because that's really the preferred option. We want to keep people out of congregate shelter. We want to keep them out of shelters. We want them in their own home. And so, you know, you're going to end up either camping in your home or camping in your backyard. You know, we tend to be Oregonians, so most of us that are probably listening to this probably already have some camping equipment. You know, looking at your shelter, make sure your home is going to stand up to shaking. You know, find and fix those home hazards, because it doesn't have to take a full, you know, your house doesn't have to fall over to make it unlivable. Just make sure that, you know, your water heater is secured, that if you have heavy hutches and those kinds of things, those are secured to the wall. Mirrors are secured to the wall so that during the shaking, it doesn't fall over. You know, thinking about what the weather is going to be like. You know, what would happen if Cascadia happened today? The last time it happened back in 1700, it was January 26th. Think about where you live and what the weather is like on January 26th. I know in the Willamette Valley, it's going to be cold and it's going to be wet. If it's summertime, it's going to be hot. So how are you going to stay warm? How are you going to stay cool? And how are you going to stay dry if necessary? And then, of course, you know, how are you going to find clean found water? We highly recommend that everyone has at least a 14 days supply of water for all of their people and pets. But you should also be thinking about how are you going to clean found water. If you have a running stream nearby, how are you going to make sure that that's clean? There are a number of commercial filters, from little straws that you can use in an individual cup or glass to household wide reverse osmosis filters. You can boil filtered water. You can use bleach or other types of chemicals to clean it. And then practice how to do that with your family so that anybody can make that clean water. When we're looking at foods, there's a lot of different approaches to emergency food. So you want to prepare your pantry in a number of different ways. You want to think about having emergency foods. You want to stock up for your pantry or look at raising your own food. Oregon has this reputation for goat yoga, and it's very well deserved because, we tend to be a state that encourages suburban livestock, chickens, and other types of small livestock. So, that is part of your Cascadia planning. Goat yogas could be considered preparedness. So when it comes to types of food, emergency food is great. You can purchase it, stick it in your garage, and still be there in 20 years. But it's bricks of sawdust. Now that sawdust is flavored. I knew that my kids would never get into my emergency food in my 3-day kit. They would eat the nuts and the more flavorful things, but they never ate my emergency food. So this is something that you can kind of set it and forget it. But you're not going to want to live on this for more than just a few days. So looking at stocking up your pantry, looking at dried foods, well, that kind of goes back to needing more water. Having canned proteins, that could be canned meats, it could be canned fish, it could be peanut butter, and some of the other nut butters. Looking at having spices, because you don't want to have a lot of bland food afterwards. You want to make sure you're getting that caloric intake because you're going to be expending a lot of calories after Cascadia. And so you want to kind of stick with what you already eat. We tend to eat a lot of red beans and rice, so that's what we have in our pantry. You don't want to be trying to cook new things during an emergency situation. You want foods that will give you comfort, and that's the stuff you already eat. And then, of course, this is Oregon, so you can look at growing your own. We've had a huge boom over the last couple of years during COVID in people starting gardens. And this is awesome, except for the fact that I can never find canning lids now. So people are learning how to do this again, and that's wonderful. So having fresh food is going to be great. You can also use it for bartering for toilet paper afterwards. One tomato is one roll of toilet paper, perhaps. So this is, one way that you can also do your Cascadia preparedness, but also improve your, type of life in the meantime. Because, oh my gosh, summer ripe tomatoes are amazing. And the one thing that I really like to iterate is that, we're Oregonians. We already do a lot of the things that we're going to need to do after Cascadia. I would bet my last cup of coffee on the fact that about 80% of the people watching this right now or later on the replay has some camping gear. They may not have the full set, but you got something. And, a lot of us are gardeners, whether it's house plants or, a full-on farm. We go hiking, we go hunting, we go fishing, we're outdoorsy kind of people. And we're going to be relying on that kind of attitude after this for making our life much more comfortable after Cascadia. So what I encourage people to do is kind of look around their home, go to your junk drawer. You probably have a flashlight and can openers and folding knives in your junk drawer. So raid your junk drawer first and see what you can put into your grab and go bag. You may have extra leather gloves or old sturdy shoes that you can put by your bed so that if something happens in the middle of the night, you don't get cut feet. So look around your home and see what you're already doing and already have before you start worrying about, going out and purchasing anything. And one thing that is like super important is that you share this drive to get prepared. You don't have to go full on prepper, but really thinking about who's going to be relying on you or who you are going to be relying on afterwards, and starting to create those connectivity beforehand. Organize your neighborhood. You don't even have to talk about preparedness. Just having a potluck in your neighborhood gets people to know each other much better, so that if something bad does happen, and it doesn't have to be Cascadia. Think about the ice storms, winter storms, the flooding, wildland fires. Having an organized neighborhood is really important. Connect with your community. Find out who's offering first aid classes in your area. Think about joining your community emergency response teams. Thinking about, leading a after-school program at your school on preparedness. We just need everyone to get involved in this process. Reach out to people on social media, talk to people in the grocery line about the need to get prepared, and we can eventually get there. So what I really encourage people to do is pick 3 things that you can do today, or pick 2. You're really, really ambitious, you can do all 3. So the first thing that you could possibly do today that's not going to cost you any money is to start a conversation. And this could be in person. Your family could talk about this tonight around dinner. You could be on social media, say, hey, I saw this great presentation and it learned a lot about preparedness. Is there anyone else in my social circle that wants to work together to see how we can get each other better prepared? Another thing that you can do is looking at putting an out of contact into your contacts on your cell phone. And if you put it into contacts under one EQ text, that one is going to put it at the top of your contact list, so that after something bad happens, your out of state contact is right there at the top of your contact list. And you can text them that you're okay, or, I'm heading to the school to pick up the kids, so that your out of state contact knows what's going on. And a third thing that you can do that's not going to cost you any money is grab some old shoes, some old sturdy shoes, a pair of leather gloves, and a flashlight. I've kind of gone to the headlamps that are rechargeable, and put them all into a shopping bag, one of those cloth shopping bags, and tie it to the head of your bed, or put it near your bed, so that if something happens in the middle of the night, it doesn't have to be an earthquake. It could be a fire, or whatever happens in the middle of the night. And you got something there to protect yourself. And the one thing that I really want to reiterate is, after Cascadia happens, we are going to have a new normal. This will change the way we live in the Pacific Northwest for decades. We have to decide what that normal looks like. And we create that new normal every single day through actions or inactions. So you can choose to be prepared, and you can choose to protect your family and your neighbors after Cascadia by getting prepared, being able to share food, being able to share resources, because we really can do this. We've seen Japan accomplish what we need to accomplish here in Oregon. So we know that it can be done. We just need to get started on it. So this is my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards that occur to you tonight about 4 o'clock in the morning that wake you up bolt right, that said, oh, I should have asked Althea this question. Feel free to drop me an email and I will get back to you. And I am going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Althea. That was great. It's always nice reminders to have this information kind of forefront. We did have quite a few questions pop up, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Are periodic re-evaluation of the tsunami impact zones updated in regards to rising oceans? And if so, will the tsunami evacuation maps be updated?
Yeah, so climate change and ocean rise is factored into our current maps. And as we learn more about the impacts of climate change and ocean rise, that will be factored in even more. We reevaluate the maps almost constantly. We're not updating them constantly, but we're constantly looking at if they needed to be updated. For instance, up in Clatsop County and in Tillamook County, they recently did some new modeling with better maps that they didn't have available when they first did them back in 2013. And so there were some changes to those evacuation maps, but there's not material changes in the maps. We have, and I'll humble brag here, Oregon has some of the best evacuation maps in the world. And we're really proud of the products.
Nice, that's good to hear. As you were sharing a bit about the maps and the website, I plugged that in for the chat for everybody so they could copy and paste. Someone was wanting you to see if you could share more about Beat the Wave maps.
Yeah, so the Beat the Wave maps are some great maps that the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries did. And if you go to the Oregon Geology website, you can see some of them. So what they did, and these are really useful for land use planning, you know, where do we need to site vertical evacuation structures so that people who cannot get to high ground have something that they can go to for safety. So the Beat the Wave maps look at, you know, those first wave arrival times and how fast you have to be going at ground before those waves start to arrive. And so those are great products. We can, for instance, say that this bridge is out. You know, they can play around with the parameters of the models and say this bridge is out. So how long does it take to go around this route, so that they know that they have to reinforce that bridge if they want people to take 15 minutes to get to high ground as opposed to 45 minutes to get to high ground, which is, there's a situation up in Clatsop County where that one bridge, if they strengthen that one bridge, it's 15 minutes to high ground as opposed to having to go all the way around 45 minutes.
I know in Newport, they've just opened recently. Well, I don't know if it's open to the public yet, but they've just finished building educational building there where it's vertical evacuation.
Yeah, that's the OSU building, and
yes,
you can go
yes.
up on top of it. And there's
a
view of the bay there from the top.
I haven't been on top yet, but that is a pretty nice view. Okay, so here is something. So for homes that are in the tsunami zone, there's the assumption that they may be destroyed. And so the folks won't be able to go back to them. So in that case, when they can't shelter in place, what are some of the other options?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you can also substitute tsunami zone for wildland interface, urban wildland interface for wildland fires. Yes, those homes are not going to be there afterwards. That's why the grab and go kit, you know, preparedness is really important. And so what we recommend that if your home is in the tsunami zone, partner up with a family that is outside of the zone, and you put an amount of your emergency supplies there. You know, they might keep a case of wine for you, or, you know, some of your others. And so you have a plan ahead of time that you've practiced with this other group, so that when it happens, they know that they're coming to you. Cannon Beach had a great program up in good gravy, I'm forgetting the name of it, but on the north side of town, there's this little area. And that's what they did, is people who lived in the tsunami zone partnered with a family that was outside of the tsunami zone, and they kept all of their supplies up there. And so if you are also in the wildland urban wildland interface, you could also store some of your supplies with somebody who is in the city or an area that won't, where the houses won't be burned down.
That's a great suggestion. Here is something about, so further inland, they would imagine that the water tables would be severely affected, or dams. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, we know that water tables can be affected from earthquakes. A few years ago up at Haida Gwaii, which is one of the islands to the west of British Columbia, along the chain there, there's a native Indian group that one of their springs stopped producing water because of the earthquake. And we know that some wells are going to be impacted by this. And when it comes to dams, yeah, there are some dams that are of concern. They're usually the smaller earthen dams that weren't technically geoengineered to withstand these kinds of earthquakes. You know, they could be 100 years old and they're just basically piles of dirt. Some of those are of concern, and there is a concerted effort right now going on to assess all of the dams in Oregon and to suggest mitigation practices. The big dams on the Columbia, the Snake River, not really worried about those collapsing. Those are huge chunks of concrete. Might affect, excuse me, it might affect power generation and the ability to go up and down through the locks. Both of those are going to be impacted, but the dams themselves on the Columbia will survive. Yeah.
Okay. Old coal mine tunnels in the hills where homes are built now in Coos Bay, North Bend along the Oregon coast could maybe cause sinkholes. Are there any measures being taken to mitigate this risk or loss?
You know, I don't have an answer to that one because I have not heard that one before. So the person you would ask about that would be your county emergency manager. And in Coos Bay, I believe that's Gabe Fabrizio. So the county is in charge of looking at those kinds of hazards and figuring out how to mitigate them. So I would highly recommend that if you have a specific question for your county, reach out to your county emergency manager.
Okay, very good. And so when the shaking is happening, I know you wait till after the shaking to go get up to higher ground if you're in the tsunami zone, but during the shaking, like where's the best place to be? Do you want to try to get outside if you're inside? Or I've heard like doorways, or like what during the shaking, do you just get under a heavy, what's the first thing you should do when you feel shaking?
The first thing when you feel shaking is drop. Because depending on how close you are to the origination of the shaking, it could be so strong that it'll throw you to the ground, which could cause injury. We saw a lot of injuries during Northridge from people breaking bones because they were just literally thrown to the ground so hard. So you don't want to start this with broken bones. And you want to get underneath something. You know, even if it is a fairly flimsy object, it's some protection. That's why when you're looking at putting in your kitchen table, look at those beautiful old antique vintage kitchen tables. So you want to build space around you. At work, I keep boxes of publications underneath my desk because my desk, those cubicles, and they're going to come down, but I have boxes of really solid publications underneath my desk, so that will hold them up and have a place to dive to when I'm in the office. Kind of have to, you know, think ahead and create spaces. We don't encourage people trying to evacuate. I don't know if you remember back to that video during the strong ground shaking, you saw fronts of buildings falling down. You saw pieces of buildings falling down from high rises. The most common injury during an earthquake is from stuff falling on us. And so that's why we want to drop, we want to cover, and we want to hold on. If you're already outside, you can drop and crawl to a more open space. You want to get away from buildings, but you want to be down on the ground while you're doing it, because you don't want to be thrown to the ground.
Okay, very good to know. Any estimates of how long it would take to get roadways usable after the event?
That really depends on which roadway and has it been mitigated beforehand. So ODOT is working on hardening specific routes like 97, because there's going to be much less damage east of the Cascades than there is west of the Cascades. So there's a lot of effort into getting that roadway mitigated, and it will be open really quickly afterwards. When we're looking at west of the Cascades, the answer again is kind of depends. I mean, they're going to get I-5 up and running as fast as possible. A lot of problematic areas are being mitigated. When you're starting to look at like bridges over rivers, when you're looking at landslides coming down, some roads are going to be closed for 3 to 5 years. Earth moving equipment will probably make some route around it, but you know, it's going to be make do for a really long time afterwards.
Yes, sorry, one more thing just came through, but it's not a question, it doesn't look like, but so probably I've heard folks on the coast, if you're on the coast, it could be, I mean, months before you start even seeing, you know, really air traffic, even being able to come in and out and different things like that. So it probably is very important to read up and look up on your specific location so you can be prepared accordingly for that. But with that, I think that is the end of our questions. Althea, I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing all of your knowledge. Very important to, again, be top of our mind, even, you know, and at least be prepared, even just taking those few steps you mentioned. I remember last time you said, just have shoes by your bed, even if you do that, you know, and even today, I'm like, I still got to do that, you know, but taking those small steps can make a big difference on minimizing the injuries to yourself, so you can even get past those first few moments and then be able to go into survival mode. You don't want to go into survival mode if you're damaged. It would be less fun. But I want to wish everybody a good weekend. Would love to see you take those few steps Althea mentioned. And I hope you all have a great day. Hopefully this doesn't happen anytime soon, but if it does, we'll be prepared as best we can. That's the best we can do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.